And if I can drink
the
this.
story, of course. Let's move on to Sofie with the Europeana Editorials and virtual exhibition.
Ask.
Sorry, Sophie. You're not going to get help from me.
Okay, and presentation mode, it should work now.
Thanks for the technical support, dear colleagues. My name is Sofie Taes. I'm representing today a photo consortium, but I'm always also wearing the hat of Leuven University. And I had the honor and the opportunity to serve this project as, let's say, a coordinator of editorial activities. Because we now find ourselves on the other side of the spectrum that John was describing, the spectrum of recontextualization of collections. Well, it starts, of course, with the material, and then it ends or it continues with storytelling. And this is an important point to touch upon when we talk about these projects in the Connecting Europe funding strand, the generic services project. What we are actually doing is providing services to Europeana, right? Europeana is our kind of the planet around which we orbit. Now, Europeana is so much more than data collections. You've heard about the amazing materials that were unearthed in the scope of WEAVE, but that's not where it stops for Europeana, and it didn't stop for the project either. Because what we do is provide storytelling, editorials that help make the digital objects and the collections more meaningful, more expressive, and therefore make them more discoverable, I would say, more visible and more relatable for those browsing to those objects. What happens to Europeana editorials? They are published, of course, on the end-user-oriented platform, Europeana.eu, and is then promoted. It's taken on by the Europeana machine that is very well versed in making sure that these editorials are distributed as widely as possible, social media, newsletters, all kinds of accounts where people can discover these editorials. Why is it important for projects like WEAVE to make an effort in this realm? Well, of course, because they also help our collections, all these efforts that were made behind the scenes, to translate to as visible and as impactful results as possible, and to gain a wider recognition for the teams and the content providers involved. What does that mean in terms of concrete output? What do we do normally in this kind of projects for Europeana? Well, we produce editorials in a range of established formats, as there are blogs, galleries, exhibitions, and a little thing we previously called browse entry points. I have no clue what's the current denominator that we should now use, but they are basically curated data sets. So data sets, smaller sets that we put together with a short description where people can enter really quickly, really easily into the material and get inspired to go on further searches on their own. In the beginning of the project, or even before the start of the project, we made a promise to Europe in terms of what we were going to deliver on the editorial side. We said, look, a bunch of blogs is what you can expect, at least for galleries, and a virtual exhibition on Roma heritage. We deployed a methodology to get to this point that you will find quite artisanal. I now am sitting here with a bit of second thoughts about including these screenshots after having seen my revered colleagues here, George, Orpheus, and the rest of the toolkit guys, because contrary to your efforts, ours really start from a very artisanal contact with the collections. So the editorials really start from the material, or that is at least what we always aim to do. The objects should speak first for themselves, And then we try to capture that speech in words and visuals that make it insightful for as wide an audience as possible. So you can see here that a first part of my methodology that was also tested and approved of in previous project is just basically mining what is there, the riches that are there in terms of materials, collections, and of course existing Europeana assets. The beauty of projects such as Weave is that indeed you weave together content provided by institutions from all across Europe, existing content, accessible sometimes in Europeana for many, many years, with totally new stuff coming in, and fostering relationships that no one would ever have suspected to be there. To be able to do that, you have to talk a lot, you have to scroll a lot, you have to read a lot. That is really the crafty part of this whole process, and the time-consuming, but also very rewarding part. Secondly, of course, you want to talk to the people who are the experts in the material, and those are the content providers themselves. So we had a range of dedicated meetings where we tried to not discuss too many other project-related topics, but really go into the images, into the 3D models, into anything that was in the pipeline towards Europeana. It's an iterative process, right? So it's not on day one in the first meeting that we were able to discuss exactly these are the parts of our archive that are going to be contributed, that's the amount of pictures, and these are the stories you can narrate about it. No, it's a process of discovery on both our sides, and also this took some time to get to a point where we could actually devise a plan. A publication plan that we hence used as a tool for planning, because we wanted to have a good representation of all the different materials, all the different partners, and all the big themes covered by the Weave project. Therefore, you need to have a macroscopic, a panoramic view first. Secondly, it was also a guide, so helping us to set up in time and in terms of personal investment of efforts, a reasonable plan for accomplishing the ambitious goals that we had. And then it became a follow-up tool. So this dynamic sheet, how very basic it might be, it allowed us to keep track of progress across the project team. Finally, I would say that a vital part in the methodology was the interfacing with Europeana. In the end, they are the exit point of the pipeline, where all the creative efforts in the end come out, and so discussing about which topics they found interesting, fitting to the end user audience, which formats were preferable for this or that topic, what a feasible schedule would be, and how production would be run. That all came into being in conversations with Jolan, or more in particular his colleague Adrian Murphy, who as always has been golden in this project. And as you can see there on the bottom of the slide, you can see that I copy-pasted a kind of a sign-off that we included in all of our blog posts, where the connection with the project is made, a link is made to the project website. We mention, of course, our funding program and our funding governance body, and you see that Adrian thoughtfully included some labels and some links that allow people to jump immediately and easily from one editorial to another. I'm happy today to present, I believe, some good and inspiring results. In total, we are at 6 end-user targeted blogs on Europeana.eu, and I'll quickly run them by you. The first one, actually, because keep in mind that Weave is kind of a pioneering project when it comes to representing intangible cultural heritage in Europeana. So what we wanted to do, among others, in the blogs is set the scene. It's like we're kind of almost dropping in from a dark storage room. We're opening a door, and we kind of want to raise an awareness of what is intangible heritage. So this is what this first blog is about, the 5 flavors as corresponding to the 5 domains that were named in the Intangible Heritage Convention of UNESCO 2003. I named different examples of language types of heritage, performance practices, social practices, traditions and celebrations, and knowledge transfer, both in terms of crafts and skills, and in terms of knowledge of nature, indigenous medicine, environmental strategies, and so on. And you can see here I try to summarize a little bit what types of collections we were able to involve in just one single blog. In this case, it's already a wide variety. It's area content, Girona content, a bit from the dance collections, from the promoter gallery, from our friends at Kikirpa. So this is also something we try to do. We of course have our network, since we just discovered that we are celebrating this year like 10 years of Europeana photography friends working together. I tried, of course, to revisit as many of them as possible also in the editorials for this project. The second one kind of builds a little bit on that first entry story. It's about, okay, we have this intangible heritage in 5 domains. How are we going to take care of it if it is intangible and untouchable? And here, of course, we come to the very interesting questions that also John raised, that when you take a tradition, something that you really cannot touch, and you try to represent it in kind of a museal way, a way that you can take care of it, how are you going to do that? Is photography a way to do that? Do you want to kind of freeze it in an artifact? And what then happens when you move to the digital realm? Because then you have another translation to make. So the questions about caring for these collections and what is an intangible heritage collections are very prominent, especially since in an ever more globalizing world, industrialization, environmental challenges also challenge these kind of practices that we're talking about here. So again, I shed a little light on what are UNESCO's activities, what are local communities and local committees working on, but also what can a project as WEAVE mean for, in this respect, the care for the heritage. Slovenia's castles. I really loved writing this blog because it was completely alien to me. So it really challenged me to dive into the historical background of some of these sites that were rendered in the 3D Arctur collections. And really it's worth your time to explore castles like the one in Prem, that I believe today is a museal site, so you can still visit it but in a totally different context. There's the Praetorian Palace in Koper. I never imagined that a Venetian inspired Praetorian Palace would be there somewhere in the beautiful riches of Slovenia. There's the Lusberg Castle on a height of 607 meters above sea level, where you first have to climb until you can't feel your legs anymore, but then you have the most beautiful view at the confluence of 2 rivers. It's really traveling without moving, using also the amazing visualizations. The Taste of Terroir was written by a colleague of mine at the university, Jenny Herman, and she explored food traditions, culinary heritage as a form of intangible heritage. She goes especially into the French notion of terroir and what it means in terms of marrying this rural idyll, this nostalgic ideation of culinary heritage, with this sense of exoticism and the way it was then promoted in commercial advertisement campaigns. You all know that the culinary industry and culinary tourism is a big thing now, and Jenny traces it back to earlier manifestations earlier in the 20th century. Again, I was able to combine many different sources of material, our friends at CRDI, Top Photo, United Archives, Frank and his team in Cullen, Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and so on. Of course, we had a blog about Castellers because the material really, I think we still couldn't do it justice with everything that we produced. It's so amazing. So I took mainly, or maybe even only, records from Girona and wove it in with a broader tale about what does the tradition represent, how does it deploy, actually building a human tower, what are the unwritten rules, as was shared with us by David and his team, and also how does it translate into different manifestations across Europe and across the world even, because there are some other traditions with the same origin. And then, this is a last minute bonus. John had this one in the making for a while and we were able to carry it off quite last minute before coming here. This is crystallizing his views on the paradox of intangible heritage, where we start from a metaphor or an analogy with the ship of Theseus, which is this very famous philosophical paradox about a ship that gets dismantled, where all the materials are replaced, and then the question remains, is it still the same ship or is it a different object? And the conclusion of John is that when all that replacement of material is done, what remains of the object is the intangible heritage. I really invite it. It's an engaging read with, as you see, a wide variety of content involved. These were the end-user-oriented blogs. We also had 2 sector-oriented blogs on Europeana Pro about the project as a whole and about all the events and how they can help promoting and safeguarding intangible heritage. We had a number of galleries. I prepared them using the Gallery Builder tool, of which you can see here a screenshot of my personal account. I'm still so happy that this is now our new workflow, right? As a curator, you put the galleries together and they get easily pushed to the team at Europeana. And in the case of Weave, this resulted in galleries about the tradition of walking to express tradition, celebration, religious inspiration, so processions, and there we had, among others, the Trapani collection that is represented. We have a gallery about favorite smells with a wide variety of providers, disappearing trades and occupations based on the idea of John, but with many other content providers in and outside of Weave involved. A gallery about the human towers. Again, I wanted to express also the visual beauty and appeal of these images and was able to mix them in with some other sources of material. And that's about it, I think. Going to the browse entry points, these curated data sets, I made 10 and I tried to cover those collections that were not very visible in the previous editorials. There's a reason for that. In some cases, there was kind of a timing issue with the publications of some of the collections, and a blog indeed takes some time to produce. And as long as you don't know which material is going to be there, that's not an easy thing to do. So some of the collections, for instance, from CIDER, from Pereshumbo, I try to give an immediate presence by putting the data sets together and allowing people to step into them immediately. We are exploring with Europeana how they are going to be presented in the new environment, because, let me quickly flip a bit onwards, because Europeana has changed. A few weeks ago, when you go to europeana.eu, it looks quite different from what it was like before. The number of tiles and of sections has very much diminished, and I think that it's kind of now further in the making, right? It's not a fixed model, it's not a fixed end result. It's kind of now building upon this new point of departure. And this is why we also have to recalibrate a little bit where is all this content going to appear. I can already tell you that the blogs are classified under stories, so this is quite straightforward. For the galleries, we are looking at the collections tab. So I think for now they are still promoted as a user-generated gallery, but we will move them into the collections part of the website. For the browse entry points, let's give it a little bit of time. In any case, the data sets are there and perhaps could be reused as topics or provider-based entry points. Now, last but not least, of course, there is this exhibition. In terms of editorials, it doesn't get much bigger than that. And because we had this very interesting but also specialized topic of Roma history and Romani representation, we sought a collaboration with a specialist in the field. And we were so lucky to find through the networks of ERIAC and Coventry University, curator Dr. Adrian Marsh, who produced this visual essay, I might say, in 7 chapters, with an afterword from contemporary artist and researcher Imogen Bright Moon, which really reflects on historical representations of and misappropriation of Romani culture and the renaissance that we see when we allow the Romani community to speak in and of and from itself. This is really what the exhibition Renaissance of Romani Representation is about. We open a window to the past, so we explain how the Romani people came to be associated with some of those misapprehensions, some of those biases, some of those labels that it has been struggling with for over a millennium. We trace back really into all documents, maps, depictions, illustrations and texts, where those might have come from and how they were continued. But we also look at the present. What are we trying to do to not only mitigate, but also remediate and recalibrate conversations about and with Romani representatives? And so we come from the non-Romani gaze that is really an internalized view of Romani culture, so the story that is coming from the community, from contemporary expressions of cultural identity. We go to one specific artist, Imogen Bright Moon, who tries to take it back to a more panoramic view. What are the different modes of expressivity that could be at play here when you are trying to tell the story from within to outside? So what remains there to do? The exhibition is going to be published on the 26th of September. It's in the very final stage of completion, so the images that you saw were screenshots from the actual content management editorial system at Europeana. So it's out there already a little bit in digital space, but it will be publicly launched on the 26th of September. And of course we invite everyone to explore, to share and to promote as widely as possible. We also are discussing with CRDI to publish a pro-blog on 3D digitization. So Mark's and David's team's efforts in this really, I think, are something that could interest many of our peers in the GLAM sector. And so what we are contemplating is translating some kind of an essay or an article that you are already working on and having it published on Pro. And then we potentially wanted to publish a follow-up blog on the improvement of Romani representation in Europeana. I left it in this list because it's also still in the publication plan, and we kind of debated upon doing this as really a blog after the end of the project, when we have all our experiences also with publishing the exhibition gathered. And then finally, I think we collectively want and need to keep an eye on the visibility and the retrievability of these editorials. It's not that we have to somehow be a door guard or something to raise a finger if we don't think it's being done well. It's just that we have a joint responsibility now, I feel, for these collections that we worked so hard on, the editorials that we co-create together, and especially the communities that we represent through them. This was it for me, and I believe I made it just in time.
Just in time and well done. So thank you, Sofie. Just in time and well done. I think the presentation and the wealth of materials and the wealth of formats we have the project contributed to Europeana is valuable, and we saw a lot of it today. So thank you very much. Also thanks to John and Valentina. So if you have any questions here, please raise your hand, and we are perfect on time. So we have 1 minute for a question. Here.
One at a time.
Yolan, please.
Thank you all three for your presentations. I think very nice overview of the LEAF project. I had a question for Sofie mainly. Thank you so much for kind of giving us that overview of the editorials. I'm sure that there's a lot of things that you learned throughout the project as well with the project partners. Are there any challenges or lessons maybe that you want us to take away from this that we can think about in future projects, Europeana, but also other project partners?
Yeah, I think what remains to be further explored are constructive, efficient, inspiring modes of collaboration. And in all of these projects that we've done in the past 10 years, we already covered a large trajectory, or we walked a long way together. With yourself, with Adrian, with many of our colleagues here, we've done different things, like basically having exploratory conversations, to really finding the material and putting it together somewhere in a database, or really writing together in a Google Doc the text and seeing it come to life. With Adrian, I remember once we divided an exhibition in few parts, and we took with a few writers the responsibility about the parts before weaving them back together. So these different modes of collaboration, they keep on refining through the process of actually doing them. And I found that in this project, as we were exploring collections and materials perhaps less familiar to us, this was something it was good that we had the experience already from previous projects, but also we felt that there was still room for growth. So working with Intangible Heritage, what does it represent for the one or the other? How to make the most of it in the editorials that are more or less in traditional formats. I think that also on that part, we could be a bit more inventive and a bit more creative maybe. Perhaps we can find different modes of expression also for intangible cultural heritage. So these are things I was contemplating while actually working on these. And mainly, yes, my main takeaways. So, and then of course, finally, the fact that Europeana is a work in the making, right? It's always on the move, it's always evolving. That does not always make it easy for short-term projects to keep up the pace. And so I think we did really great here, because liaising with you guys is never a problem. But still, now looking back on it, what is visible and what will be visible in the next couple of months of all our efforts, it's fluent. We cannot say this is the fixed result, it will be sustainable for 10 years. We know that it will transform a little bit with time. So I don't know what else we can do, but continuing the conversation and walking an even longer road together, as long as we don't get tired of each other. But no.
Can I add something a little bit onto that question, which is going to take us bit over time, but such is life. So the thing that we really learned in the project was this validation stage with the Roma content, and that was very important. And as Fred was talking before, in the capacity building and everything, that those best sort of practice documents are accessible, and so that other projects and other partners can, other community cultural heritage institutions can look at those and think about what we did and replicate those. So that's really good. But going a little bit further back historically, as I mentioned, we quite often have content that people themselves don't have. So we'll get contacted, not just, it's not usually on a community-based level, but it's a personal-based level. It's like, we don't have a picture of our great-grandfather. I've seen it on site, it's so amazing. And now there's a little bit of a shift of, there's a picture of my great-grandfather on your website, what are you doing with it? How have you got it? It's almost a challenge, and that's, for us, is a little bit, suddenly we've been so loved and so, respected for preserving culture, to now having something almost that maybe we shouldn't own. And I think this is challenges for, we have an extra challenge because we're commercially licensing, and we that's also seen as exploitative, which adds to the problem. But I think with cultural heritage institutions that have certain content, they might now be thinking, I'm scared to put this up. And we really don't want that to happen. We need to encourage this engagement and this contextual, and is so important to not just put it in the right context, but also to make it available and accessible. Because otherwise it's just like, this is the too hard basket, and we're going to put it under here, and we're not going to look at it until it's safe to do so, And when's that?
Yeah, if I can add to that, indeed, in the community work towards the editorials, I think a lesson that we certainly take away, I think we already know, but we are now even more experienced in wanting to take also the long route with communities. Of course, this effort was project-based. We accomplished a set of results, but I think what we would really aim and love to do is to continue the conversation, because in so many ways we've just started. We've explored how to engage with them, we tested different environments to do that, different modes of discussion and of contribution. I think we can make it even more reciprocal, we can make it even more interactive, participative, we can make it community driven. That would be also an important next step to take. So this is also something I take away. We've made a great effort and a really great start, but I would love to continue on this road.
Thank you, Sofie and John. The best is still to come. So more questions and comments from